My narcissistic grandma threatened to reveal my teen pregnancy. Now she's expecting me to nurse her through dementia. I, 29F, never imagined that one day I'd be back in my childhood bedroom, rummaging through old boxes, trying to figure out where things went so completely off the rails. If you'd asked me 5 years ago whether I'd ever consider coming back to this house, I would have laughed in your face. Everything about this place feels haunted by memories I spent years trying to bury. And yet here I am, on the cusp of making a decision that could determine not just my future, but the future of my entire family. My grandma, who once threatened to expose my secret teen pregnancy to the world, is now suffering from dementia, and everyone seems to think I owe it to her to become her primary caregiver. The thought makes me feel so tangled up inside, resentful, guilty, confused that I can hardly think straight. I keep telling myself I'm only here to collect some paperwork and then leave for good. But life has a funny way of pulling you back into the orbit of the people you thought you'd escaped. I come from a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, or at least thinks they do. Our family is no exception. My parents had me young. My mom was barely 20 when she got pregnant with me, and my dad was working double shifts at the local mill to make ends meet. We lived in a modest house on a quiet street, right next door to Grandma's place. From as far back as I can remember, Grandma, now 73F, was the unspoken head of the entire household. My parents looked to her for advice on everything, from what school I should go to what brand of cereal we should keep in the cupboard. She wasn't always around physically. She worked odd jobs well into her late 60s, first as a waitress, then as a grocery store cashier, and finally as a live-in caretaker for a wealthier family in the next county. But even if she wasn't home much, her influence was tangible in every decision that got made. She was the type of woman who could look at you once and make you feel like you'd either won the lottery or committed the worst sin imaginable. People in town talked about her in hushed tones. "Oh, that's Lorraine," they'd say. "You don't want to get on her bad side." My mom was meek, overshadowed by Grandma's formidable presence, and my dad, though loving, never quite had the backbone to stand up against her. So from a young age, I learned that my best strategy was to stay out of Grandma's way, to be polite, to keep my head down, to do what she said. It worked for a while, at least until I turned 14 or 15, and discovered that I had my own opinions, my own dreams, and my own mistakes to make. Grandma was conservative, old school. She believed in saving face and family honor, and if you crossed a line in her eyes, there was no coming back. She'd shame you, freeze you out, or pick at your vulnerabilities until you were a trembling mess. She had a quick wit that bordered on cruelty if you found yourself on the wrong side of it. But everyone just said, "That's Lorraine's way," as if being mean was an endearing quirk. Whenever I tried to stand up to her, if I dared question her logic, she'd turn that cutting tongue on me with such precision that I'd feel my cheeks burn, like I was 7 years old again, being scolded for spilling juice on the tablecloth. There was no winning with her, at least not if you still cared about her approval. And for a long time, I did care, because she was my grandma, and part of me believed she was just strict because she wanted the best for me. Things were rocky enough between us as I started navigating the normal teenage rebellions, wanting to wear certain clothes, stay out late with friends, or date boys she didn't approve of. But all that pales in comparison to what happened when I was 16. I got pregnant by my high school boyfriend, Luke, 17M at the time. We'd been dating for about 6 months, a tumultuous, passionate relationship in that way teen romances can be. I was convinced we were soulmates. He was just as naive as I was, equally unprepared for the reality we were about to face. When I found out I was pregnant, I felt my entire world tilt on its axis. I was a sophomore in high school, barely able to pass algebra, and suddenly I was going to be responsible for another human life. I told my mom first, unable to bear the weight of it alone. She cried, stunned but sympathetic, and promised we'd figure something out. My dad had a more predictable meltdown, raging about how irresponsible we both were, but even he softened after a few hours, realizing this was no time to push me away. The real storm was telling Grandma. I'll never forget the day we sat in her living room, a place that smelled of stale coffee and old carpet, with doilies draped over the arms of every chair. She sat across from me on her vinyl couch, arms folded, waiting for me to speak. My mouth was so dry I could barely form words, but I forced them out. "I'm pregnant." She didn't yell, not in the way I expected. She just glared at me with a look of pure disgust and said, "You are going to ruin this family. Do you understand that?" Her voice was calm, ice cold. She didn't let me or my parents talk. She declared that if word got out, our entire family would be disgraced. We'd be labeled the town's shame, and I'd never be able to live it down. At the time, I was so overwhelmed that I just sat there, nodding, tears forming in my eyes. She told my parents in no uncertain terms that the pregnancy must be kept a secret until we decided what to do. She even proposed sending me off to stay with a distant cousin until I gave birth, so we could pretend I was on a study abroad program or something equally ridiculous. Mom disagreed vehemently. She wanted us to handle it as a family, no matter what. That night, heated words were exchanged, doors were slammed, and I locked myself in my bedroom, crying into my pillow while I heard Grandma storm around the house, berating my mom for not keeping me in line. It was the first time I realized that maybe Grandma didn't love me unconditionally. Maybe she just loved the idea of me as a perfect granddaughter, one who conformed to her standards, one who made the family look good. In a twisted way, that realization broke my heart more than the idea of becoming a mom at 16. The following weeks were hell. My body was already going through changes. I was nauseous and exhausted, and the emotional stress was unbearable. Grandma wouldn't speak directly to me. She communicated through my mother, or via sharp, condescending comments. She told Mom that if I didn't take care of the situation, she'd march into the school principal's office and let everyone know what a disgrace I was. She also threatened to bring in Child Protective Services to prove that my parents were unfit. She had this smug way of speaking, as if she believed she alone controlled the narrative. At one point, she cornered me in the hallway, practically hissing, "If you don't fix this, I'll make sure the entire town knows how reckless and immoral you are. No college will ever accept you. No boy will ever want you. And you'll be sorry." Luke and I discussed our options endlessly. Adoption? Trying to keep the baby? Abortion? It was an impossible choice for two teenagers who barely understood how to file taxes. Our parents offered their opinions, but Grandma's voice remained the loudest, even though I was desperately trying not to listen. After many agonizing conversations, I decided to continue the pregnancy with the plan that Mom and Dad would help me raise the baby. Luke was scared, but said he'd try to stand by me. We hoped we could finish high school somehow, maybe get part-time jobs, and figure out a path forward. In hindsight, it was an optimistic plan, but it was the best we could do. Grandma was furious. When she learned I had no intention of getting rid of it, she came at me with a full-blown tirade, spewing insults and dire predictions about my future. Finally, she delivered her ultimate threat. "If you won't fix your mistake, I will. I'll call every single person in this town and make sure they know just how little shame you have." It was pure blackmail. She was basically forcing me into compliance with her wish for me to hide away until the baby was born. But by that point, I'd grown numb to her threats. Something in me snapped. I told her she could do whatever she wanted because I wasn't going to apologize for my baby's existence. It was the bravest moment of my life up to that point, and it cost me dearly. After that, she stopped speaking to me altogether, like I'd become invisible. She barely acknowledged me at Christmas or family gatherings, and when she did, it was with venom. High school was rough. Rumors spread anyway, as they always do in small towns. I found myself the subject of gossip in the cafeteria and the hallways, but at least I still had a few close friends who stood by me. Luke tried his best, but he was in over his head too, and eventually, about a year after the baby came, we parted ways on relatively amicable terms. By then, I was 17, trying to graduate on time and looking after a newborn named Mia, my daughter, now 12F. My parents helped as much as they could financially, but the tension in the house was suffocating. Grandma was still next door, looming like a storm cloud. She'd only come over because she wanted to criticize how I was feeding Mia, or to blame me for the stress my parents were under. I scrambled to piece together some semblance of a future. By a stroke of luck and a lot of late-night studying, I managed to graduate high school on schedule. My parents agreed to watch Mia while I took community college courses. I worked part-time at a local diner, saving every dime. Occasionally, Grandma would show up at the diner, glaring at me from a corner booth, ordering coffee just so she could watch me hustle around waiting tables. Sometimes she'd make snide remarks in front of other customers like, "You'd better get my coffee right this time. We all know you're prone to mistakes." I'd bite my tongue, smile politely, and feel my blood pressure spike. This dynamic continued for years. Even after I transferred to a state university an hour away, I still came home on weekends to see Mia. My parents took on most of her day-to-day care, which I'll always be grateful for. But it also meant I had to deal with Grandma's presence whenever I visited. She tried every emotional manipulation trick in the book: guilt trips, public shaming, constant comparisons to other family members who'd done things the right way. Yet, ironically, she still refused to let me officially cut ties with her. It was as if she wanted me around just to have someone to belittle, a scapegoat for all her grievances. In my early 20s, I started to see a therapist who helped me understand that Grandma's behavior was profoundly narcissistic. She thrived on control, on forcing everyone around her into submission so she could feel powerful, and she knew how to pick her targets. She knew I was the easiest to shame because I felt so guilty about my teen pregnancy, about the strain it put on my parents. Once I recognized her for what she was, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her keep undermining my self-worth. I stopped engaging with her. When she made a rude comment, I either walked away or gave a curt reply. I refused to let her blackmail me emotionally anymore. My parents didn't fully understand, but they respected my boundaries enough not to push me into reconciling with her. Eventually, I finished college and found a decent office job in the city, about a 2-hour drive from the small town I'd grown up in. By then, Mia was in elementary school, and my parents, though they loved her, were getting older and struggled with the day-to-day demands of raising a child. We agreed that Mia should come live with me full-time, so I found a tiny apartment that was barely in my price range. For the first time, Mia and I were on our own, forging a life away from Grandma's shadow. It was terrifying but liberating. Mia adapted quickly. She missed her grandparents, of course, but she thrived in our new environment, making friends at her school and enjoying the city's diversity. We established routines from weekend grocery trips to Friday movie nights, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. For a while, my contact with Grandma was reduced to the occasional holiday gathering or forced phone call when she happened to be at my parents' house. I'd answer the line, grimace my way through her passive-aggressive small talk, and hang up feeling tense. But at least I wasn't living under her constant scrutiny. My parents told me she was slowing down a bit, complaining of various ailments, but I didn't pay it much mind. Given her theatrics, I assumed she was just angling for attention. Sometimes I felt guilty for not caring more. After all, she was family. But then I'd remember the way she threatened me, the way she tried to sabotage any sense of dignity I had, and that guilt would melt into justified self-preservation. Then, about a year ago, I got the phone call that changed everything. My mom rang me in tears, saying Grandma had been diagnosed with dementia, early stage, but still significant enough that she'd probably start needing more help soon. At the time, I was dealing with my own stresses. Mia was about to start middle school, and my job was on shaky ground due to company layoffs. I remember pressing my palm to my forehead, listening to Mom's trembling voice, feeling a complex flood of emotions: shock, pity, fear, and, if I'm totally honest, a small shameful sense of relief. Relief that maybe, in her weakened state, Grandma would have less power to hurt me. But the relief was short-lived because my family started to rally around Grandma in a way they never did for me. My aunts, uncles, and cousins, some of whom never gave me the time of day, were suddenly all about family unity. They organized rotating shifts to bring her meals, clean her house, and drive her to doctor's appointments. The unspoken expectation was that I, as her granddaughter, should be front and center in this care schedule. They'd rattle off tasks, my name scribbled onto a chart, as if it was perfectly logical that I'd be available to spend my weekends nursing Grandma. It infuriated me that they were so quick to dismiss the history between us, as if her dementia somehow absolved her of all she'd done. I tried to keep some distance, but the guilt tripping from my relatives was intense. My mom, in particular, would call me up with a trembling voice, saying things like, "She's still your grandma, and she needs us. You don't have to forgive her, but can't you at least help out?" My dad, who usually stayed neutral, began to parrot the same lines, telling me how this might be the last chance for our family to heal. My aunts and uncles tried a different tactic, calling me selfish, accusing me of letting my parents shoulder too much responsibility. They argued that since I was the youngest adult in the family, I had the energy to handle Grandma's care. No one seemed to remember the years of emotional abuse, the threats, the blackmail, or maybe they remembered and just didn't care. All that mattered to them was that I fulfill my duty. Eventually, I agreed to visit Grandma one afternoon, partly to appease everyone and partly out of curiosity. I wanted to see for myself if her condition was really as dire as they claimed. I arrived at her house, still the same old place next door to my parents, and felt a knot in my stomach as I rang the doorbell. My aunt answered, leading me into the living room where Grandma sat in a recliner. She looked older, frailer, her once sharp eyes now cloudy. The house smelled of disinfectant and stale air. Grandma glanced at me, her gaze drifting over my face. At first, she didn't seem to recognize me. Then, after a few seconds, she said my name, but the tone was oddly distant. I remember feeling my breath catch in my throat. Part of me was braced for an insult or a scolding, but it never came. She just stared like she was trying to piece together who I was to her. I tried to make conversation, asking how she was feeling, if she needed anything. She responded in halting phrases, sometimes mixing up details, talking about events from decades ago as if they were current. It was unnerving to see her like that, a diminished version of the terror she once was. For a second, I did feel pity. But then she turned to my aunt and asked, "Isn't she the one who shamed us all by getting pregnant?" The words might have been delivered in a confused, mild tone, but they cut me open all the same. My aunt shot me a panicked look, quickly trying to redirect the conversation. But Grandma just kept talking, recalling bits and pieces of my teenage years. She couldn't quite place Mia's name, but she remembered that I'd had a baby. Her sentences devolved into something about how they should have forced her to give it up. My aunt gently told Grandma to hush, that she was mixing things up. I stood there, my cheeks flushed, feeling 16 all over again. Even in her muddled state, Grandma was perfectly capable of regurgitating the same old venom. When I left that day, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, tears brimming in my eyes. The entire visit felt surreal. This woman who'd caused me so much pain was now half lost in her own mind, yet still capable of throwing daggers. My family tried to spin it as, she doesn't know what she's saying, but I wasn't so sure. Maybe dementia was just removing her filter, letting her true feelings come out without the cloak of social niceties. In the following weeks, the pressure ramped up. My relatives insisted that Grandma needed full-time care, and since I worked a job with some flexibility, I should consider moving back home to nurse her. They acted like it was a done deal, that I'd uproot my life and Mia's life to come be at Grandma's bedside. They kept tossing around phrases like family obligation and you owe it to your grandmother. It made me want to scream. Where was this sense of obligation when Grandma threatened to ruin my life? Where was this empathy when I was balancing teenage motherhood with school and a job? Mia, now old enough to pick up on adult conversations, asked me point blank, "Are we moving back so you can take care of Grandma?" I was honest and told her I didn't know, that we'd have to figure out what was best for us. She scrunched her face and said, "But she's never been nice to you." Out of the mouths of babes. I gently explained that Grandma was sick, and sometimes families have to decide if they want to take care of someone who's hurt them. Mia's eyes grew wide, and she nodded thoughtfully. She then asked, "Wouldn't that make you sad, though, if she's still mean?" And I realized how twisted the situation was, that my daughter was worried about me being emotionally abused by my own grandmother. I decided to consult with a close friend, Tasha, 30F, who's known me since college and is well aware of my tumultuous family history. She works in the healthcare field as a social worker, often dealing with older clients with dementia. She explained the realities of what it means to be a caregiver, how it's not just cooking meals and helping with hygiene. It's a 24/7 responsibility. She warned me that it can be extremely challenging, especially when the patient is combative or has a history of abuse. She said, "You need to ask yourself if you can handle that emotional toll. It's okay to protect yourself and your child." Her words were a breath of fresh air. Everyone else kept telling me it was my duty, but Tasha reminded me that my mental health matters too. I mulled over it for weeks, torn between guilt and self-preservation. Part of me felt like I should do it, not for Grandma, but maybe for my mom. She spent her life under Grandma's thumb, and she's not emotionally strong enough to handle the caregiving alone. But the other part of me remembered all the therapy sessions, all the nights I cried myself to sleep because Grandma had made me feel worthless. Was I really willing to step back into that fire? My parents, sensing my hesitation, tried a compromise. They suggested we hire a part-time nurse to help me, so I wouldn't be bearing the full weight alone. But Grandma's modest savings wouldn't cover much, and my parents aren't exactly wealthy. I pointed out that if the entire extended family chipped in, maybe we could afford professional care in a facility. My relatives balked. Some thought it was too expensive. Others felt Grandma should remain at home. No one wanted to be the bad guy who abandoned her to a nursing home, so they pinned their hopes on me, the scapegoat who was supposed to swoop in and fix everything. I tried to keep my distance during this time, focusing on Mia and my job. But the phone calls kept coming, pleading voicemails from my mom, guilt-trippy messages from my aunt, accusatory texts from my uncle. They claimed I was being heartless, that my own grandmother had raised me, which wasn't even true. She just lived next door and overshadowed us, and that now I was deserting her in her time of need. The more they pushed, the more resentful I became. It felt like they were rewriting history, erasing the trauma I'd endured, all so they could maintain their image of a close-knit family. Then, about a month ago, Grandma took a turn for the worse. She started wandering outside at night, forgetting where she was. My dad found her on the sidewalk once, wearing her pajamas, looking up at the stars and muttering about how she needed to warn people about me. Apparently, in her mind, she was still determined to tell everyone about my teen pregnancy, even though that was over a decade ago. My parents were terrified she could get hurt out there or pick a fight with a stranger. They installed new locks, tried to keep a better eye on her, but it became clear she needed round-the-clock supervision. This development escalated the family's pressure campaign. "She's going to hurt herself if we don't step up," my mom said through tears. "I can't do this alone, and your father isn't in good health either." My father begged me to at least come stay for a while, to see if there was a short-term solution. My aunts and uncles started bandying about phrases like power of attorney and medical guardianship. They asked me if I'd be willing to take on that legal responsibility, which felt absurd. I'm in my 20s with a child of my own. I'm not prepared to handle the legal, medical, and financial complexities of an ailing grandparent, especially not one who despises me. Yet, here I am, physically standing in my old bedroom, rummaging through boxes, searching for any legal documents I might need if I do decide to step in. My mom said some of Grandma's paperwork ended up here by mistake. The room looks smaller than I remember, the walls still painted in a faded lavender from my teenage years, the corners stuffed with dusty stuffed animals and old textbooks. It's like stepping into a time capsule of who I was before I became a mother at 16, before I moved away, before I realized how toxic this family could be. While I sift through the boxes, old memories surface. Me lying on this bed, crying over my teenage belly that was growing with Mia inside. Me overhearing Grandma in the kitchen telling my mom what a disgrace I was. Me quietly dreaming of a life where I wasn't under anyone's thumb. Now I'm an adult. And ironically, the question is whether I'm going to volunteer myself to be under Grandma's thumb again, albeit a weakened one. A folder labeled Lorraine's Documents catches my eye. I open it to find scattered papers, medical forms, an old copy of her life insurance policy, some bills. Amid them is a handwritten note, Grandma's scrawl across the page. It's dated years ago, around the time I was pregnant, and it says something like, I can't let her ruin our family's reputation. Must stop her. My eyes read the words over and over, my hands trembling. Even then, she was strategizing how to damage me if I didn't comply. I sink onto the bed, the note crumpled in my fist. My heart races, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I don't let them fall. I'm furious, but I'm also sad. Sad that we've come to this. Sad that for all her bravado, Grandma led a life fueled by spite and control. Dementia is cruel, and part of me wonders if it's some cosmic karmic joke that the woman who lorded over everyone's secrets can't even keep her own memories in order now. But I also know dementia doesn't erase years of harm, nor does it negate the fact that she might need help. It's a moral dilemma that keeps me awake at night. A soft knock on the door startles me. My mom stands there, eyes swollen from crying. She asks if I've found what I need, if I have any questions. For a moment, we just look at each other, the air thick with unspoken tension. Then she breaks down, sobbing that she's so sorry for everything Grandma did to me. She claims she tried to stand up for me, but never knew how. It's the most honest I've seen my mom in years. I put the note aside and hug her, both of us crying quietly in this dusty room. Through tears, she begs me to help with Grandma's care, if only so she doesn't feel so alone in this. She confesses that Aunt Jean and Uncle Robert are starting to fade from the picture. They come around less and less, leaving my parents to do the lion's share. She feels trapped, but she also can't bring herself to send Grandma to a home, not after everything. I pull away, wiping my eyes, and tell Mom I need time to think. She nods, understanding, and leaves me alone again. I glance at my phone and see a text from Tasha. Call me when you can. I dial her up, and as soon as she picks up, I can hear the empathy in her voice. I spill out everything, finding that note, my mother's tears, how everyone expects me to either step up or be labeled heartless. Tasha repeats what she told me before, that if I decide to help, it should be on my terms, with clear boundaries, and that I need to prioritize my mental health and Mia's well-being. Mia is in the next room, talking softly with my dad. She's old enough to sense the tension, but I haven't burdened her with all the details of Grandma's past actions. I worry about what it would do to her if we had to move here. Would she be okay changing schools? Would she resent me if I spent all my time caring for Grandma? It's not fair to uproot Mia, who's just finding her stride in middle school, but do I have a choice if my parents can't manage Grandma alone? All these questions swirl in my mind. By the time I finish talking to Tasha, the sun has set outside, the street lights glowing through my old bedroom window. It's quiet, except for the murmured voices of my family downstairs. I know they're all waiting for my decision. I fold up Grandma's note and tuck it back into the folder. No matter what choice I make, that note is a stark reminder of the damage she's done and the lengths she would have gone to if circumstances had been different. I walk downstairs to find my mom, dad, and Mia sitting at the kitchen table. They look up expectantly. I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads, with a million paths branching out in front of me, none of them easy. With a shaky breath, I tell them my answer. I'll stay for a week or two, just to help my parents set up a consistent routine and see if there's a realistic way to manage Grandma's care at home. But I'm not committing to anything long-term yet. My mom closes her eyes in relief, nodding. Dad gives me a grateful look, but I can see the disappointment there too, that I'm not declaring my indefinite devotion to Grandma's needs. Mia, for her part, just asks if she can still go back for her school orientation next month. I promise her she'll be able to. I can sense that she's not thrilled about spending more time in this house, knowing there's so much unspoken conflict. But she's a trooper, far braver than I was at her age. I vow to keep her out of the line of fire as much as I can. The next day, I accompany my parents on a visit to Grandma's doctor. We discuss the progression of her dementia, the medications she's on, possible living arrangements if caring for her at home becomes unfeasible. The doctor is kind, but makes it clear that as dementia advances, Grandma will need increasing supervision. He gently suggests that a memory care facility might ultimately be the best place for her. My parents exchange guilty looks, and I stare at my shoes, thinking of how my relatives will probably accuse us of betrayal if we go that route. I start trying to establish a schedule, drafting a list of tasks. Morning, feed Grandma, help her dress, administer medication. Afternoon, check vitals, ensure she's safe, maybe some mild exercise if she's up for it. Evening, prepare dinner, supervise hygiene, more meds, secure the house so she can't wander at night. It's exhausting just writing it down. Mia hovers by my side, reading my notes, and says softly, "That's a lot, Mom." And it is. Each task might be simple on its own, but strung together day after day, it becomes a full-time job with no respite. On the third day, Grandma has a sudden outburst in the afternoon. She thinks someone stole her jewelry box, which is actually right on her dresser. She starts hurling accusations at me, calling me a thief and a liar. Even in her muddled state, the way she spits those words feels too close to the hostility she always showed me. I try to calmly show her the jewelry box, to reassure her no one took it, but she gets agitated. She calls me names, says I'm out to get her. My parents witness the whole thing, and I can see the pain in their eyes. Eventually, Grandma tires herself out and slumps into her chair, muttering under her breath about how she regrets everything. I retreat to my old bedroom, shaking with anger and sadness. Mia comes in and places a gentle hand on my arm. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asks in that caring voice that makes me want to cry. I realize I'm not okay at all. Every day here feels like it's eroding my resolve. I can't escape the memories of how she treated me, and now I'm bearing the brunt of her confusion and paranoia. Some people might say dementia changes a person, that I shouldn't take these outbursts personally, but it feels personal, maybe because it's always been personal. After about a week of this, I'm on the verge of a breakdown. The stress is affecting my sleep, my appetite, my patience with Mia. I look at my phone and see messages piling up from work. My boss is asking when I'm coming back, if I can handle certain tasks remotely. My life in the city feels a million miles away, but it's still there, waiting for me. Meanwhile, my grandma's condition isn't going to improve. It's only going downhill from here. One night, I confront my parents with the reality that we might not be able to do this indefinitely. They look torn. Mom cries, saying she can't bear the thought of putting Grandma in a facility. Dad is grim, rubbing his temples, finally admitting that maybe we should consider it. The following morning, Grandma is relatively calm, seated in her recliner with a blanket on her lap. I take the opportunity to sit down next to her. I try to engage her in conversation, telling her about Mia's school achievements, about how well she's doing in math. Grandma looks at me with mild confusion, as if she can't quite recall who Mia is, but she nods politely. For a moment, I see a flicker of softness in her eyes. She says, "Well, you seem like you're doing all right, for now." Then her voice drops to a conspiratorial whisper, "But don't think I've forgotten what you did." I close my eyes, feeling the sting of tears, and realize that no matter how much time has passed or how fragile she's become, she's still the same person underneath. She still blames me, still wants to hold me accountable for something that happened nearly 13 years ago. She can't let go of her anger, her need for control, even as her mind slips away. And in that moment, I know in my heart that I cannot be her full-time caretaker. Not without losing myself, not without opening old wounds every single day. I deserve to heal from this trauma, not immerse myself in it. That afternoon, I talk to my mom and dad privately. I tell them that I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I've tried, I've stayed for a week, and it's tearing me apart. I can't uproot Mia's life, can't risk my own mental health for a woman who spent years making me feel small and ashamed. I explain that I'm not abandoning them, that I'll contribute financially where I can, that I'll help them research facilities or in-home nurse services, but I cannot be the primary caregiver. My parents look devastated, but something in Dad's eyes suggests he understands. Mom cries, begging me to reconsider, but I stand firm. I feel shaky, like I might collapse, but I hold my ground. Over the next couple of days, we make phone calls to local care facilities. We schedule visits, gather cost estimates. It's expensive, heartbreakingly so, and we know Grandma will rail against the idea once she realizes what's happening. My aunts and uncles will probably come out of the woodwork to call me a monster, but I'm done caring. It's not about them anymore. It's about protecting my family, my daughter, myself, and making sure Grandma gets the professional care she needs, even if it's not at home. The night before Mia and I leave, I find myself alone in the living room with Grandma. She's dozing in her chair, a lamp casting a yellow glow across her wrinkled face. I think of all the history between us, all the hate, all the fear. For a fleeting second, I wonder if there's anything to salvage, if maybe I should say something kind. But then she stirs, opens her eyes, sees me, and her brow furrows. She mumbles something about that ungrateful girl, then drifts back to sleep. I feel a heaviness in my chest, a final wave of sadness for what might have been if she'd been capable of real love. In the morning, I pack my car while Mia hugs her grandparents goodbye. Mom's eyes are swollen. Dad's face is stony. They both look tired, older than they were just a week ago. I promise them I'll call every day, that I'll help with the facility arrangements from a distance, that I'll drive back for a visit if they need me. We don't talk about the tension or the blame. We just cling to the sliver of unity we have left. Grandma is in her bedroom, presumably asleep. Part of me is relieved I don't have to see her one last time. The drive back to the city is quiet. Mia looks out the window, fiddling with her phone occasionally. I can't shake the feeling that something monumental just happened, that I closed a chapter of my life that's been open since I was 16. A mixture of guilt and liberation washes over me. I know I'm leaving my parents with a huge burden, but I also know I can't martyr myself for Grandma's sake. I have to protect my own peace, and Mia's too. When we finally reach our apartment, I unload our bags and collapse onto the couch, feeling both exhausted and strangely light. Mia sits down beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. She simply says, "I love you, Mom," and that's all I need to hear right now. Later, we order pizza and watch a movie, trying to reclaim the normalcy of our routine. My phone vibrates repeatedly, texts from various family members, no doubt, but I ignore them for now. I'll deal with that fallout tomorrow. Tonight, I just need to breathe. In the days that follow, the phone calls come in waves. Some relatives lash out, saying I've condemned Grandma to a place she never wanted to go. Others, more softly, ask if I'm okay, if maybe they can pitch in to lighten the load. My mother's calls are sporadic. Sometimes she cries, sometimes she's calm. Grandma's been told she's moving to a care facility, and predictably, she's furious. She keeps accusing everyone of betrayal, especially me. But I can't keep twisting myself in knots for her. Not anymore. Mia senses my mood swings, and one day she surprises me by doing extra chores around the house, leaving a note on the fridge that says, "You're the best mom, and I'm glad you're taking care of us." My eyes fill with tears because I realize that in saving myself, I'm also teaching Mia an important lesson, that it's okay to walk away from toxicity, even if it comes from someone who shares your blood. Yes, there's still a part of me that wonders if I'm doing the right thing, if maybe I'll regret not trying harder. Dementia is a cruel disease, and maybe there was some small window where Grandma and I could have forged a truce. But every time I think that, I remember her words, her threats, and the anguish she inflicted without remorse. Dementia might erase her inhibitions, but it doesn't erase the legacy she left. Sometimes I catch myself remembering a tender moment or two, like the time Grandma taught me how to tie my shoelaces, or when she placed a blanket over me as I napped in her living room when I was little. Those moments are drowned out by the years of psychological warfare, but they still exist, flickers of a person I wish she had been more often. That's what makes it complicated. She wasn't a cartoon villain. She was a damaged individual who lashed out at everyone, particularly me. And now she's paying the ultimate price, locked in a battle with her own mind. In the end, I've chosen not to be her nurse through this journey. That role will likely fall to professionals in a facility equipped for her needs. My parents will visit, maybe my aunts and uncles will pop by occasionally for show, and the cycle will continue until Grandma's final days. I don't relish the image of her alone in a facility, confused and scared, but I can't fix what's broken in her or what's broken between us. All I can do is move forward, holding on to my daughter, cherishing the life we've built together. I've learned that love doesn't always mean self-sacrifice to the point of self-destruction. Sometimes love means protecting yourself and the people who depend on you from someone who never learned to love correctly. Grandma threatened me in the worst way possible when I was just a kid. Now, all these years later, the tables have turned and she's the one in a vulnerable position. It's a twisted irony, but it doesn't erase the past or obligate me to put myself in harm's path again. If there's any silver lining, it's that my relationship with my mom might finally be moving toward honesty. She's opened up about her own struggles growing up with grandma, about how she never felt good enough, how she let that pattern continue into my childhood. Maybe in time, we'll find a healthier way to be mother and daughter. I can't say the same for grandma. Her time for atonement or understanding seems to have passed. I look at Mia, bright and kind and full of potential, and I feel a surge of gratitude. She's the reason I stayed strong through years of shame and manipulation, and she's also the reason I knew I couldn't relive that cycle of abuse. I owe it to her and to myself to choose a future untethered from grandma's cruelty. Whether the rest of the family sees it that way or not, I'm finally learning that it's okay to step away from toxic people, even if they're family, even if they're old and sick. Maybe one day in some quiet moment, I'll visit grandma in the facility. Maybe I'll sit by her bed, hold her hand, and feel some semblance of compassion. But not now. Not while the wounds are still raw. For now, I'm done. She may have brought me into a world of fear and shame, but she won't keep me there. I've broken free, and that, I think, is the healthiest outcome I could ever hope for. I don't know if she'll ever realize the hurt she caused or if the dementia will warp her memories beyond repair. But I do know this. I have a life to live, a daughter to raise, and a future that no longer revolves around grandma's approval or her threats. And that, above all, is what truly matters. The rest, the guilt, the judgments of others, the lingering trauma, will take time to process, but I have no doubt I'll find a way. After all, I've already come this far, and I'm not about to let her or anyone else pull me back under their control. So I'm choosing peace for myself and for Mia. That's the lesson I wish I'd learned sooner, but at least I'm learning it now. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone who's been hurting you. Even if that someone is your grandmother. Even if you once thought you owed them everything. In the end, the only person I truly owe anything to is myself, and the little girl who depends on me to show her what real love looks like. I'm determined to show Mia that real love isn't drenched in shame or threats. It's supportive, caring, and safe. And that's a love Grandma never showed me, and a love I refuse to withhold from myself any longer.